January 12th, 1888. The world outside had ceased to exist, erased by a solid, screaming wall of white. Inside the tree, it was warm. The air smelled of pine smoke, dried herbs, and the faint, sweet scent of wool. Caleb Holloway placed another small, split log into the tiny cast-iron stove, the metal glowing a cheerful cherry red. The wind, a physical force of over 60 miles an hour, struck the ancient cottonwood with the force of a battering ram. The massive trunk, 12 feet thick at its base, groaned a deep, sonorous note, the sound of a living giant bracing against a god's fury. It was a comforting sound. Hannah, his wife, sat at their small carved table, mending a sock by the light of a single tallow lamp. The flame barely flickered. Here, inside the heart of the great tree, the wind was only a distant, muffled roar. Their home, a circular room carved and built within the hollowed-out behemoth, was an island of profound calm in an ocean of chaos. On a thick bed of straw in a small, connected alcove, their chestnut gelding, Brandy, snorted softly in his sleep, warm and safe. "More tea?" Hannah asked, her voice as serene as the lamplight. Caleb nodded, his gaze drifting to the thick, curved wooden panels that formed their walls. "Listen to that. The White Death, the old trappers call it. They say it scours the world clean." He ran a hand over the wood, feeling the deep, resonant vibration of the wind against the tree's outer bark. "Let it scour. We're safe here." Through the triple-paned glass of their one small window, a salvaged ship's porthole, they could see nothing but a churning vortex of snow. But they could hear it. Faintly, carried on a lull in the gale, a sound that chilled them more than the -45-degree air ever could. A desperate human cry, swallowed almost instantly by the storm. The town of Willow Springs was dying. It had begun 9 months earlier, in the hopeful green of the spring of 1887. Caleb and Hannah Holloway arrived in Willow Springs with little more than their sturdy wagon, their horse Brandy, and the $150 they had painstakingly saved. Caleb, a man whose hands were shaped by 2 decades as a ship's carpenter in the yards of Boston, had a quiet confidence. Hannah, daughter of a naturalist and botanist, saw the world not as something to be conquered, but as a book to be read. They needed land, but the prime parcels along the gentle slopes had been claimed by ranchers like Montgomery Sterling, or sold at exorbitant prices by the town council, led by the pompous and perpetually perspiring Mayor Hutchkins. "We don't have $1,000 for a quarter section, Mr. Mayor," Caleb said, standing before the man's imposing oak desk in the small town hall. "We have $150 and a willingness to work." Mayor Hutchkins sniffed, polishing his spectacles. $150 might buy you a plot in the cemetery, Mr. Holloway. Good land is the lifeblood of prosperity. We are a town on the rise." It was Hannah who found their solution. While Caleb negotiated, she had walked the creek that gave the town its name. There, set back from the water on a patch of land considered too boggy and shaded for farming, stood a giant. An ancient cottonwood, a survivor of fires and floods, its trunk a gnarled fortress of bark. A lightning strike from a generation past had hollowed its core, leaving an opening at the base big enough for a man to walk through without stooping. She brought Caleb to see it. He ran his hands over the wood, his shipwright's eyes assessing its integrity. He tapped it, listening to the solid resonance. He stepped inside the hollow, a space nearly 10 feet in diameter, soaring 30 feet up before tapering. That afternoon, they returned to the mayor's office. "We'll buy the half-acre with the old cottonwood by the creek," Caleb announced. Mayor Hutchkins blinked. That worthless patch? The tree is half dead and hollow. It's a blight. We'll give you $50 for it, Caleb stated. The mayor almost choked. $50 for land nobody wanted. He'd be hailed as a genius. Sold. Later, at the general store, the mayor held court. And then the fool says he means to live in it, live inside the hollow tree. A wave of laughter rolled through the assembled men. Montgomery Sterling, a man whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance, slammed his fist on the counter. A house for squirrels, not for decent folk. What is this town coming to? George Massey, the town's only professional builder, a man who built every house in Willow Springs, square, drafty, and identical, shook his head with an air of professional pity. It's structural madness. The first good wind, the whole thing will come down on their heads, or it'll rot from the inside out. He's building his own coffin. The name stuck. From that day forward, the project was known by two names, the Holloway's Folly, and more grimly, the Tree Grave. The mockery did nothing to deter them. While George Massey began work on Montgomery Sterling's new two-story manor on the hill, a monument of imported lumber and glass that would cost over $4,000, Caleb and Hannah began their work with an axe, and adze, and a deep understanding of wood. Their first task was to clean the hollow. Years of debris were cleared out, revealing a solid, dry floor of compacted earth. Caleb, using the skills he'd honed shaping the curved hulls of whaling ships, began to line the interior. He didn't build a square house inside a round tree. He honored the tree's shape. He felled smaller pines, split them, and with Brandy's steady strength, hauled them to the site. Then, with painstaking precision, he steamed and bent the wood, fitting curved planks against the inner wall of the cottonwood, creating a smooth, strong inner shell like the inside of a massive barrel. Between this inner wall and the tree's own 3-foot-thick layer of living wood, Hannah packed their insulation. She had read the book of nature well. She gathered bags of dry moss, which held air in microscopic pockets, and traded with a sheep herder for bags of raw, lanolin-rich wool, a natural fire retardant and unparalleled insulator. This 2-foot-thick layer of insulation was Caleb's secret weapon against the Dakota winter. For a chimney, Caleb devised a clever system. He purchased a small, efficient pot-bellied stove for $12. Then he ran a narrow stovepipe up the inside of the hollow, insulated it with clay and rock, and vented it through a small, pre-existing hole in the trunk 30 feet up. The high vent would prevent it from being blocked by snow and would draw air beautifully. He installed a small salvaged ship's porthole for light, sealing it with pitch and wool. A heavy, insulated door, fitted as tightly as a ship's hatch, completed the seal. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Whether you're in the mountains, the plains, or somewhere the wind howls just as fierce, these lessons of frontier wisdom are timeless. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the crisis finally arrives. The construction took them 4 months. Their total cost, including the land, the stovepipe, and a few tools, came to $87. While they worked, the town watched in amusement. A betting pool was started at the saloon on which month the Holloway's Folly would collapse. A new slang term entered the local lexicon. To attempt a foolish, overly complicated project was to be going Holloway. "Her Jeb is trying to dig a well on top of the ridge," one farmer might say. "Yep," another would reply. "He's going Holloway for sure." Mrs. Aldridge, the town's primary source of gossip, told anyone who would listen that the Holloways were heathens, living like animals in a hole, an affront to civilized Christian society. Caleb and Hannah ignored it all, finding deep satisfaction in their shared labor. They were not building a house, they were building a sanctuary. By September, it was finished. A small lean-to was built against the back of the tree for Brandy, packed with hay for the coming winter. Inside, their home was a single, round room, snug and warm. On the first truly cold night of October, a frost settled over the valley. The residents of Willow Springs shivered in their poorly insulated cabins, stuffing rags into the gaps in their walls and feeding cords of wood into their hungry, inefficient fireplaces. Inside the tree, Caleb lit a small fire. Within 20 minutes, the radiant heat from the little stove, trapped by the layers of wool and moss and the sheer thermal mass of the cottonwood, had warmed the space to a comfortable 65 degrees. They used a handful of wood to achieve what took an armful in the houses in town. They sat in quiet contentment, listening to the wind outside, feeling the deep, steady peace of the living wood around them. They were ready. In early January of 1888, the signs began. Hannah noticed it first. An unnatural stillness fell over the plains. The air grew heavy, dense, and the sky turned a milky, opaque gray that stole the color from the world. The birds fell silent. The deer and other wildlife moved down from the hills, seeking the thickest groves. "A storm is coming, Caleb," she said, her voice low. "Not a normal one. My father described this sky. It's the kind that kills." While the townspeople went about their business, grumbling about the strange cold, the Holloways made their final preparations. They brought Brandy into his lean-to, ensuring he was sheltered by the massive bulk of the tree itself. They stacked their modest but sufficient woodpile inside the main room. They triple-checked the seal on their door and window. Caleb climbed the inside of the trunk one last time, using a series of carved handholds to ensure the high chimney vent was clear of any ice. They were not preparing for a storm. They were preparing for a siege. On the morning of January 12th, the world held its breath. The stillness was absolute. Then, around noon, the first sign of the White Death appeared. A low, dark cloud bank on the northwestern horizon, moving with impossible speed. The temperature, which had been a brisk 10 degrees, began to plummet. Within 90 minutes, it had dropped 50 degrees to a life-stealing 40 below zero. Then the wind hit. It was not a gust, but a solid wall of force that struck the town of Willow Springs like a physical blow. And with it came the snow, a blinding horizontal blizzard that instantly reduced visibility to zero. The White Death had arrived. In town, chaos reigned. The wind tore at the new milled lumber of the square-built houses, peeling away shingles and finding every crack. The fine flour-like snow was driven through keyholes, under doors, and around window frames, forming drifts inside the homes. Families huddled around their fireplaces, burning through their wood piles at a terrifying rate, yet the cold seeped in relentlessly. On the hill, Montgomery Sterling's brand-new $4,000 manor became his prison. The huge, fashionable plate-glass windows, a source of such pride, turned into massive sheets of ice, radiating cold into the rooms. The wind howled through the ornate gables. By the second day, the immense weight of the snow, accumulating at a rate of inches per hour, began to make the roof groan ominously. Sterling and his family, wrapped in every blanket they owned, were freezing in their mansion. Inside the cottonwood, the holloway sat in warmth and safety. The little stove required only a few logs every few hours. The 3-foot-thick walls of the living tree, combined with their wool and moss insulation, held the storm at bay. The wind's roar was a muted symphony, the tree's groans a reassuring counterpoint. They ate their simple meals, read their few books, and listened to the heart of the storm, sheltered in the heart of the tree. They were using fewer resources in a day than the townspeople were burning in an hour. On the third day, a new sound pierced the storm's howl, a frantic pounding on their heavy door. Caleb unlatched it, pushing against a small drift that had formed even in the lee of the tree. A figure, covered in snow and ice, stumbled inside and collapsed on the floor. It was George Massey, the builder. His face was a waxy gray mask of frostbite. Sobs racked his body. "The roof!" he gasped, his words choked with ice. "My roof! It came down, the weight of the snow, my wife, my boy. We barely got out." Hannah was already there, wrapping him in a warm blanket, pressing a hot cup of tea into his trembling hands. There was no, "I told you so." There was no hint of vindication. There was only compassion. "You are safe now, George," she said softly. "You are all safe with us." He had brought his wife and son, huddled in the relative shelter of the lean-to with brandy. Caleb brought them inside. The builder who had called their home a coffin now found it to be his ark. They were the first, but not the last. Later that day, the Henderson family arrived, their cabin's chimney having blocked completely, filling their home with smoke before the fire died, leaving them to freeze. The next morning, guided by some primal instinct toward the one point of stability in the whirling chaos, came 3 more families, including the widow, Mrs. Fairchild, and her children. Subscribe if you believe that preparation is wisdom, not paranoia. Now back to the story. The tree home, designed for 2, became a refuge for 17 souls. It was crowded, bodies packed together on the floor, but it was warm. The air was thick with the scent of wet wool and fear, but also with the profound relief of survival. Hannah, calm and organized, rationed their food, making a thin but hot stew for everyone. Caleb, ever the pragmatist, showed the other men how to feed the stove, how the small, efficient fire was their lifeline. They huddled together, a desperate, impromptu community, their past mockery forgotten, their survival dependent on the very holloway's folly they had all ridiculed. They spoke in hushed tones, listening to the storm that had taken their world, sheltered by the living walls of the tree. For 7 days and 7 nights, the White Death held the plains in its grip. Then, on the morning of the 8th day, an impossible silence fell. The wind was gone. Caleb pushed open the door to a world remade, a world of alien beauty and utter devastation. The sun shone from a brilliant blue sky, sparkling on a landscape buried under 10 feet of sculpted snow. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Of the town of Willow Springs, only the barest outlines of roofs were visible, many of them crushed and broken. Chimneys were snapped off, and a profound, deathly silence hung over the valley. The 17 survivors emerged from the tree, blinking in the painful brightness. The true toll became apparent over the next few days as the survivors dug out. 42 people were lost. They had frozen in their beds, been crushed by collapsing roofs, or had gotten lost in the whiteout just steps from their own doors. Nearly every building was damaged. Montgomery Sterling's Grand Manor was a ruin, its 2nd story caved in, its fine furniture buried in snow. A week later, the survivors gathered in the wreckage of the general store. The mood was somber. heavy with grief and a new, terrible understanding. Montgomery Sterling, his fine clothes replaced by borrowed woolens, his face gaunt, walked slowly across the room to where Caleb and Hannah stood. He stopped before them, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a broken, humbled man. He did not look at Caleb's eyes, but at his hands, the hands that had built salvation. "I was blind," Sterling said, his voice cracking. "You were the only one who could see." He took a ragged breath, the apology costing him more than his mansion ever had. "We built for sunny days. You built for the world as it is. I thought modern meant better. You showed me that wisdom has no age. My pride is now buried under the snow with my fortune." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Will you teach us? Will you teach us how to build like you?" All eyes in the room turned to the Holloways. Caleb looked at Hannah and saw his own sorrow reflected in her eyes. There was no triumph in this moment, only a deep, aching sadness for what it had cost. "We never wanted to be proven right this way," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying in the silent room. Then Hannah spoke, her voice clear and kind. "Of course we will teach you. That's what neighbors do." And so, the rebuilding of Willow Springs began, not with pride, but with humility. Montgomery Sterling, his fortune gone, but his resolve forged anew, used what little he had left to fund the materials. But this time, the design came from Caleb and Hannah. It became known as the Holloway method. Caleb didn't teach them to just build houses. He taught them to see the landscape. He showed them how to find natural advantages, a sheltering rock outcropping, a south-facing hill that could be dug into to create an earth-bermed home, and yes, other large hollow trees. He taught them the principles of insulation he'd learned as a shipwright, and Hannah had learned from nature, using packed sod, moss, and other locally sourced materials to create thermal mass that held heat in winter and stayed cool in summer. George Massey, the builder, became Caleb's most devoted student, his former professional arrogance replaced by a craftsman's sincere desire to learn. The new homes of Willow Springs were not grand, but they were smart. They were low profile, energy efficient, and built in harmony with the land. The phrase "going Holloway" was reborn. It no longer meant embarking on a fool's errand. It meant applying uncommon foresight and building with wisdom. Caleb and Hannah Holloway lived the rest of their long lives in their home inside the great cottonwood. They never moved. It was their sanctuary and the town's enduring symbol of salvation. Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and Hannah joined him 6 years later at 82. The entire region mourned their passing. They were not buried in the town cemetery, but at their request, in simple graves on a small rise overlooking the cottonwood that had been their home. The town of Willow Springs thrived, becoming known throughout the territory for its unique, resilient architecture and the wisdom of its people, a wisdom born from tragedy. The story of their survival spread far and wide. 2 years after Hannah's death, the territorial government sent an engineer and a draftsman to Willow Springs. They spent a month with the town elders, documenting every aspect of Caleb's designs and Hannah's insights into natural materials. The result was a government-printed pamphlet titled The Holloway Method, Building for the Frontier. It was distributed to every new homesteader and land office in the territory. It detailed how to select a site, how to use the earth for insulation, how to build small and efficient stoves, and how to live with nature instead of fighting it. The lessons learned in the heart of a single tree saved countless lives in the decades that followed. The great cottonwood still stands today, a living monument. The town of Willow Springs has preserved the home within it. A small, hand-carved sign hangs by the door. It doesn't mention the tragedy or the mockery. It simply reads, "The Holloway Home, built 1887, in memory of Caleb and Hannah, who taught us to listen to the wisdom of the world, and to Brandy, their faithful horse, the first life saved." The strongest shelter is not built against nature, but within it.